I think we see sort of a few common themes that happen in the market, and sort of broadly, these sort of come down into two sides of the fence that have, historically been quite opposed to each other. The first is that you sort of have ever increasing sort of regulatory burden. There's been more and more directives that are being put out by the EU, by regulators in the UK, sort of by global and US regulators, and obviously the geopolitical environment is meaning that, the obligations that banks have are becoming larger and more subject to change more quickly. So having sort of the ability to update and, be in line with regulation at scale is becoming, increasingly more difficult and increasingly more complex and increasingly more costly if you get it wrong. I think on the other side of that is sort of in response to some of the legislation, which, if you're onboarding a really big commercial customer, can be really large and sometimes quite difficult to understand and interpret in a way that makes sense, is this sort of customer experience side of things. So, the response from a lot of banks has been, we have a lot of regulatory burden. That means we're going to throw more people at it. We're going to throw more manual processes at it. And customers are just looking at these, archaic processes and almost, if not walking away, being extremely frustrated by the experience as they come to go through their onboarding process. And what that manifests as is, financial institutions not intelligently reusing their data, not getting access to public information or documents where it's possible, and putting a lot of the burden on the customer in a way that feels quite jarring as sort of your first experience when opening a product or switching to a new bank. So we've seen it on both sides. They've been sort of exacerbating each other, but we fundamentally believe there's a better way. So I think if the way that we think about it, and I think we've sort of seen this play out through experience talking to banks, having worked in the product for a while, having seen it done badly in my past. I think you've got to look at, especially in Europe, the ability of how can I architect my organization so that I get the ability to make this journey as frictionless as possible. And we've seen examples where banks have been able, just by looking at their policy, reevaluating it of something that's built up over years, to go from asking for 1,500 data points typically to sort of in the hundreds. And then sort of when you look at that, you also have the ability to look at the different players, the ecosystem that's available today, and say, right, how can I automate as much of this data and document collection as possible? So instead of, starting with asking the customer to provide you everything, you move more to an experience of, hey, this is what I found out about you publicly. This is what I've been able to verify. Do you agree? And sort of all of the data and all of the surveys say that customers much prefer that experience than a lot of the onus being on them. And added benefits to the bank that it's all from trusted, verified sources in line with the way the regulation would have you act. So I think that first step of how do we orchestrate and automate as much as we physically can, and then I think it's around, do I have the digital engagement channels that means this isn't sort of a black hole? Because even with the best data collection in the world, you could still be looking at areas of the process that need to be, performed by humans. There might be subjective judgment that needs to come into this. So I think it's, doing the automation, but then having the transparency and sort of being able to make sure that your customer always understands where they're at in the process. Again, sort of the research bears out, yes, delays aren't ideal, but customers are much more accepting when they understand where they're at in a process, and sort of you're able to proactively show them and communicate with them digitally versus, I have to ring up a helpline, God forbid, or something to try and figure out what's going on. So for me, it's the automation of what you can, and then it's the transparency into what you can't that really stands out as a best-in-class experience for commercial onboarding. So I think, we've taken an approach of you have to start with the end customer in mind, that I think we're all used to in our personal lives now. If I go to Amazon or if I want to open any type of account in different industries, I think we all get frustrated and have probably left sign-up processes where it doesn't feel like that's going to be as automated as we want. And for too long, it felt like in banking that, you can have a certain experience in the consumer bank, but as soon as there's businesses and entities involved, then you get this not quite 1980s experience, but it's definitely markedly different to what we get in our own personal lives. And I think customers are starting to look at that and, say this isn't acceptable anymore. There's a lot of research around the dropout rates, the amount of revenue that gets lost as a result. Um, but I think that's led to is how can we start to use, principles that exist within typically in our consumer lives and within the consumer banking realm and start to scale them up into commercial, which for too long has been, probably hasn't had the level of digital investment that definitely a lot of the consumer banks have had throughout Europe. And what that manifests as I was saying before, is how do we create digital experiences that show transparency, that show progress, and allow me to interact with the bank digitally, which, is becoming increasingly more the preferred ways that customers want to be able to interact with their bank. How do I, use orchestration and sort of different players within the ecosystem? So we're seeing that more in the commercial bank where a long time ago it was no real digital channels, but now we're seeing very mature digital channels and sort of partnerships embedded within that experience to complete the whole process. So one of the classic ones would be your IDV providers being embedded within sort of your digital banking experience, so you can get everybody through the process without having them step out, everything like this. So I think that's only going to increase. And hopefully, we look back at this time and say, wasn't that weird that the commercial bank for so long was as manual as it was? And the ability for me as a customer to choose to self-serve and work within these digital apps just becomes second nature. So I think what we've seen sort of play out in the industry, and what I think we've got to an inflection point, so to speak, now is I think a lot of banks, as these regulations started to come in at sort of the turn of the millennium, really, in the wake of some of the attacks, I think there was a big rush, especially in the last sort of 10 years, for like, hey, let me get another solution for this and another solution for this and another solution for this. And we've sort of layered on more and more technology and sort of point solutions that have created, and then trying to then stitch that into an experience that makes sense to the customer. I'd say we've seen it play out that's probably not what's happened. We have the relationship manager in the bank probably has one view of the world, the compliance specialist has another, and God forbid we even know what the customer knows what's going on around this whole journey. And if you take that one step further, yes, we're talking about onboarding, but nobody actually comes to your bank to onboard. Nobody comes to a bank to onboard. They come to a bank because they want to grow their business. They come to a bank because they have savings that they want to invest. They have sort of a financial need that they want to service. And we've almost made onboarding this standalone island that feels very jarring to a customer, because you're just basically saying, here's all of my obligations that I have, please sort this out for me, rather than, hey, we know that you're looking for a loan, we know that you're looking for some savings, let us have an experience that, yes, we have some compliance things that we need to check off, but let us have an experience that makes sense to you for that journey that you have for your customer need, rather than making you feel the individual silos of my organization. So I think sort of it goes back to, understanding your customer journeys, understanding, from the very beginning, if I'm seeing this type of customer as this type of need, how do I fuse, one seamless journey as much as we can that allows them to feel like we're servicing what they're actually asking for, rather than just our compliance burdens. And we intelligently reuse data, we intelligently orchestrate document collection, we only ask for things that we truly need. And if we do ask, we ask for it once and we're able to reuse it across systems. And then again, sort of, I'll die on this hill probably, but how do we make sure that the customer has transparency of what's needed from them and where they're at in the process at all steps of the journey? And, we've seen banks who have taken that step back and taken a holistic view of their customer journey, really start to bring an experience that resonates with customers back into their operating model. So it can be done. It's an exciting time to be able to do it, but I think it starts with understanding the full customer journey and not trying to fight everything on an island in individual silos, because you're only going to end up creating confusion for the bank and for the customer. So maybe to what I just said before, I think sort of what's unique and what excited us about bringing the full circle capabilities into nCino is nCino's historically been a platform that services sort of that customer product origination and sort of renewal needs. So we've always had very robust journeys around executing against, a customer is looking for this type of bank product and sort of getting them through that process as efficiently as possible. What we found from our customers was, a lot of the time now that we've streamlined to a certain degree this sort of credit risk and sort of understanding whether we should be able to give this loan or this product to this customer, from a, will they pay me back perspective. But that was only part of the journey. And especially in commercial, once it's got into onboarding land, we found a lot of the delays around being able to service sort of product origination was actually in the AML and onboarding space. So we thought, we had a pretty unique opportunity here, as I just said, to look at the full customer journey and then sort of be able to have one seamless journey that doesn't feel jarring and doesn't feel like, I'm doing one thing for credit risk and I'm doing one thing for onboarding and AML risk. But actually, I have one journey that needs to be complete in order to give this business what they want to be able to grow their business. So that allows us to, reuse data across both journeys, because, I need credit bureau data to assess that this person is who they say they are, as much as I need it to assess, can they afford to pay back the loan. I need to be able to build out the corporate structure to be able to know, are these people going to default on their loan, as much as I need it to know, are these people using this money potentially for nefarious purposes. So we sort of thought, and we've seen it play out, that, if we was able to bring, that best in class orchestrating a workflow and intelligent orchestration that nCino has into sort of the rich capabilities that Full Circle has to, yes, provide access to all of the underlying data providers that we would need in the ecosystem to run these processes, but then also that intelligence layer to, be able to automate the application of policy, where, what Full Circle is able to do is look at all of that data and intelligently flag up, hey, this is an issue that's going to need a human to step in and make a decision, or hey, this is actually looking really good. We can see a full credit history, everything that we would expect. It's great. So we're able to automate this process, and you have automation capabilities embedded into this, so you can get to that, in the really simplest of cases, straight through processing. And as you sort of scale up the commercial complexity chain, given sort of where the bank's appetite are at the moment, at least automating all of the manual menial work that goes on. So you only ever provide a human who's probably, highly skilled in the bank to say, hey, this is everything we found. These are the risk factors as a result. This is what we need you to make a decision on, because we still see far too many humans at banks doing tons of data collection, doing tons of manual aggregation, and often missing things, but just because of the sheer weight of systems that they have to navigate, which is not really in line with everything that we expect in this day and age. So I'd say, the first one that springs to mind is, there is tons of stats out there at the moment. I think the last one that I saw is that on average, it costs the bank $30,000 to onboard a customer, just to onboard a commercial customer, just in terms of staff costs and what it happens there. And then I also saw one that, around $25,000, I think it is the average that's lost per customer due to sort of poor onboarding processes. And I think, especially when you're talking about the larger institutions, the costs, if you look at sort of what's being used to service onboarding AML compliance, like the human capital costs are astronomical, so to speak, because, as I said earlier, they have, to a large degree, thrown humans at the problem to try and orchestrate their way out of this. And then I think if you look at, the opportunities for lost revenue as a result of people dropping out the process, of people not being enamored with the process and sort of getting frustrated and not willing to do more business as a result of it, there's real lost dollars there. And that's, obviously hitting the bank in sort of the bottom line and the top line in both of those areas. And then, sort of the triple whammy on top of that is, if you can't do these processes at scale and you're not able to prove and sort of show the data lineage of, somebody coming in, how you sort of made the decisions about them and how you were servicing them on the books, that also can manifest in fines. And we've seen record fines handed out on both sides of the Atlantic for these types of things. So there's real money being lost in all parts of this process by not having these journeys right, by not having these journeys robust and orchestrated and as automated as you want. And then I think just sort of the final one is, we spoke a lot about getting people through the door, but you mentioned it there, through the whole client life cycle. is a lot of the time we've seen financial institutions, maybe they have the new to bank processes right, but as soon as it comes into these, lifetime cycles, so to speak, um, that just falls off a cliff. And that's where we're seeing a lot of human remediation happen. You hear lots of banks are having to have multi-million pound programs to do sort of to do KYC, KYB remediation, where they need to reassess these customers and where they've not got their data structured, where they're not able to intelligently reuse data, where they haven't got a living, breathing customer profile that lives, that these become very, very manual processes again. Whereas, with the nCino and Full Circle platform, yes, we automate getting you through the door. But once you're on the books, it doesn't stop there. And, when these remediation processes kick in, we can basically rerun the data again. We're always perpetually doing it in life. And basically, we can flag up the ability. So you only really need to look at cases that your bank policy dictates you would want to look at, rather than having this blunt one size fits all approach that means you're just wasting tons of cost. And you're probably not doing it in the most risk efficient and human efficient way, causing frustration throughout the colleague base, throughout the customer base, and putting a ton of strain sort of on the operating model. So that's what the platform's been founded on, and been great to see it play out.